There are faces in Hollywood that never fade, faces that seem to glow even when the reels stop turning. And then there is Jean Harlow, the woman whose hair shimmered like poured moonlight and whose smile could light an entire decade. To the world, she was the platinum blonde, the first great bombshell of the silver screen, a living spark in an era hungry for divine illusions. But behind the brightness there was a girl named Harleyan, barely past adolescence, swept into a life she never quite chose, running at a speed no heart could endure. Her rise was sudden, dazzling, almost violent in its intensity. One moment she was a teenager trying to find her place in a fractured family. The next, she was the blueprint for a new kind of Hollywood star, bold, seductive, untouchable. Yet the truth was softer, quieter, and infinitely more fragile. Jean carried the weight of her mother's ambitions, the pressure of studios that polished her image until it gleamed unnaturally bright, and the loneliness of being adored by millions while understood by almost none. Hollywood turned her into a phenomenon, but it also consumed her youth and blurred the line between the woman she was and the myth she became. Every camera flash, every magazine cover, every whispered rumor pushed her further into a world where glamour was both her crown and her cage. This is not just the story of a star who shone too brightly. It is the story of a young woman who tried to hold on to herself in a place that demanded she become someone else. Jean Harlow did not simply act in Hollywood's golden age, she defined it. And in the brief, blazing arc of her life, she became eternal. Long before she became a shimmering icon of the silver screen, Jean Harlow was simply Harleyan, a quiet, sensitive girl navigating a world that often felt too large and too unstable for someone her age. Born on the 3rd of June, 1911 in Kansas City, Missouri, she entered life surrounded by uncertainty. Her parents' marriage disintegrated early, leaving her tethered to her mother, Jean Bello Harlow, a woman whose own dreams of stardom had been stifled by circumstance. That unfulfilled longing shaped everything that followed. Harleyan grew up absorbing both her mother's affection and her frustrations. Their bond was fierce, almost consuming, part love, part expectation. Jean Bello adored her daughter but also saw in her a chance to reclaim the future she believed fate had denied her. Harleyan, still too young to understand the weight placed on her small shoulders, learned early that pleasing her mother was both a comfort and a silent obligation. Her childhood was marked by movement, new homes, new schools, and a continual sense of impermanence. She rarely had the chance to set down roots or form lasting friendships. Instead, she became observant inward and adaptable traits that would later give her an unusual magnetism on film. But at the time, they made her feel like an outsider drifting through her own life. At 16, seeking escape, independence, or perhaps just a moment of self-direction, she eloped with Charles McGrew III. The marriage was impulsive, born more from restlessness than love, but it transported her to Los Angeles, a place that would change her forever. Under the sun-soaked skies of California, she hoped for a fresh start, far from her mother's ambitions and the instability of her youth. Yet Los Angeles was not a city one could enter quietly. Hollywood's presence was everywhere, the billboards, the gossip, the deep hum of desire in the air. Still, Harleyan had no intention of joining it. She imagined a modest life, a peaceful home, a future decided by her own choices rather than someone else's dreams. But destiny rarely respects carefully drawn boundaries. One day she accompanied a friend to a casting call, standing outside with no expectations. As she waited, a studio employee noticed her. There was something arresting about Harleyan, her pale skin, her luminous eyes, the softness of her features that hinted at both innocence and hidden depth. When asked if she was an actress, she laughed, shy, almost embarrassed, and insisted she wasn't. But Hollywood has always been drawn to the reluctant star, the one who doesn't yet realize the camera has already chosen them. She soon found herself accepting small, anonymous roles, walk-ons, background shots, fleeting glimpses that most audiences would never notice. But directors noticed, cameramen noticed, and bit by bit the industry began murmuring her name. There was something about the way the light touched her face, the quiet vulnerability she carried without trying, the subtle tension between fragility and allure. Meanwhile, her marriage strained under the pressure of youth, financial instability, and the strange gravitational pull of Hollywood. Harleyan was changing even if she didn't fully understand how or why. Something in her life was shifting, preparing her for a path she never planned to take. By the time her marriage unraveled, Hollywood had already claimed her attention and perhaps a piece of her heart. She returned to her mother, not realizing that this step backward would propel her violently forward. Her mother, who had once seen fame slipping away, now saw a second chance. Harleyan was no longer just a girl in the background. She was on the cusp of becoming Jean Harlow, an identity the world would soon embrace, and one that would forever alter the course of her life. If Part 1 traced the quiet beginnings of a girl trying to escape the shadows of her childhood, Part 2 marks the moment destiny caught up with her swiftly, loudly, and without mercy. The young Harleyan, still not yet Jean Harlow, found herself swept into Hollywood's rising tide before she had time to understand what fame could demand. Her small roles meant merely as favors or experiments began to gather attention. Directors noted how naturally the camera gravitated toward her, as if drawn by some invisible current. Even in silence, even in the background, she held a presence that felt unmanufactured, a rare quality in a town full of eager dreamers. Hollywood has always been a place where a single glance can rewrite a life, and for Harleyan that moment arrived when Howard Hughes, the enigmatic industrialist turned filmmaker, crossed her path. Hughes was not merely looking for an actress. He was searching for a phenomenon. His ambitious and notoriously troubled production Hell's Angels had already consumed years, budgets, and reputations. He wanted someone who could spark electricity on screen, someone new, unexpected, unforgettable. When he saw Harleyan, he knew instantly that she had something the film needed, not polished skill but raw, effortless presence. He offered her a role. She hesitated. She was not trained, not confident, not certain this world was meant for her. But the opportunity was too large, too strange, too dazzling to refuse entirely. And so, still unsure of what she was stepping into, Harleyan agreed. The filming of Hell's Angels was a trial by fire. The production demanded grueling hours under harsh lights, endless retakes, and emotional pressure she had never experienced. Hughes pushed his cast relentlessly, determined to make the most expensive film of its time also the most spectacular. In those conditions, many actors faltered. Harleyan surprisingly did not. Her natural instincts carried her a blend of vulnerability, flirtation, and sincerity that felt both modern and timeless. When the film was finally released in 1930, the reaction was immediate and explosive. The audience didn't just notice her, they fixated on her. Reviews spoke of the girl with the white blonde hair, the irresistible newcomer, the young woman who stole scenes without trying. The public wanted more, and studios took notice. MGM, the most powerful studio in Hollywood, moved swiftly. They saw in her what Hughes had glimpsed, not just beauty, but potential for massive box office appeal. Within months, they purchased her contract and began the process of transforming Harleyan Carpenter into Jean Harlow, a name destined to radiate from marquees. But the transition was not gentle. MGM was a dream factory built on discipline, control, and an almost militaristic sense of production. They dressed her, lit her, taught her, sculpted her image with precision. They trained her comedic timing, pushing her into sharp, provocative roles that contrasted strikingly with her soft, uncertain nature. And though she adapted quickly, the pressure was immense. Acting was no longer a curiosity, it was a necessity, a responsibility, a demand that never slept. Jean worked tirelessly, learning to balance the desires of directors, the expectations of audiences, and the hopes of her mother. She felt fame tightening around her like a corset, dazzling in public, constricting in private. But even under this pressure, something extraordinary happened. She improved. She studied scripts, watched veteran actors, and absorbed the rhythms of the studio system until her performances felt not accidental, but intentional. By the end of her first year at MGM, one thing was clear. Jean Harlow was no longer emerging. She had arrived, and Hollywood was preparing to revolve around her. By the time Jean Harlow fully stepped into MGM's world of polished glamour and relentless production schedules, Hollywood had already begun rewriting her image. But it wasn't until the early 1930s that the myth crystallized. Jean wasn't merely a rising actress anymore, she was becoming a cultural phenomenon. The transformation began with her hair. The studio elevated her naturally light hair into a dazzling icy shade that seemed to glow under even the dimmest studio lights. It wasn't just blonde, it was platinum. A color so bright, so theatrical, so seductive that it changed fashion overnight. Women across America flooded salons begging for the Harlow look, unaware of the punishing mixtures stylists used to imitate it. Silk gowns, thin eyebrows, bright lips, Jean's image redefined feminine allure. Her breakthrough roles followed with the momentum of a tidal wave. Films like Red-Headed Woman, 1932, showcased a Jean who was bold, wickedly funny, and radiating confidence. She wasn't just playing roles, she was embodying a new archetype. The unapologetically sensual modern woman who took what she wanted and made audiences adore her for it. In an era still clinging to old-fashioned ideals, Jean's characters were shocking and irresistible. Then came Dinner at 1933, where her comedic instincts bloomed fully. Critics who once dismissed her as a pretty face began acknowledging her timing, her charm, and an intangible quality that made her unforgettable. Audiences didn't just watch Jean Harlow, they watched for her. She had become essential to the era's cinematic language. But perhaps the most revealing turn was Bombshell, 1933, a satirical whirlwind in which Jean played a glamorous movie star suffocated by the very machine that created her. It was a parody, but also a mirror. Audiences laughed, unaware of how close the script cut to her actual life. The photographers who chased her, the rumors that swirled around her, the pressure to maintain an impossible standard. Jean delivered the role with such fire and vulnerability that it felt less like acting and more like confession. Her fame reached a level few could imagine. She graced magazine covers, monthly emerged as MGM's top-grossing actress, and set fashion trends with every film. Her walk, her laugh, her poses all became cultural signatures. Fans copied her makeup, her hair, even her playful smirk. Hollywood had produced stars before, but Jean was something different, fresh, electric, modern. Yet inside this whirlwind, Jean was still a young woman barely past her early 20s, trying to keep pace with an image that never rested. Fame for her was both a crown and a weight. She struggled to reconcile Harlow, the sensitive girl who craved privacy, with Jean Harlow, the glamorous icon the world demanded. The persona she wore on screen began to overshadow her real identity, and the boundaries between the two blurred dangerously. The studio capitalized on her every success, pushing her into back-to-back productions. Exhausting hours on set, endless publicity photos, dancing lessons, wardrobe fittings, interviews, Jean's days blurred into each other in a haze of rehearsed glamour. And though she smiled through it all, those close to her saw the toll it took: late-night fatigue, quiet moments of doubt, and a longing for something simple, something real. Still, each time the cameras rolled, she delivered magic. Her films during this period solidified her place not only in MGM's roster, but in Hollywood's history. She became the emblem of an era desperate for escape, its shimmering platinum symbol of fantasy. But beneath the iconic glow, the first cracks were beginning to appear. Jean was ascending higher than ever, yet the climb was steep and the air at the top was growing thin. She was a star, yes, but she was also a young woman, running faster than her heart could keep up. For all the light she brought to the screen, Jean Harlow's private world was threaded with shadows, the kind that follow a person quietly, the kind that sharpen under the glare of fame. Behind the platinum exterior and the dazzling smile, she carried a series of emotional wounds, shaped by love, loss, and the relentless scrutiny of a Hollywood that fed on spectacle. Her first marriage, the impulsive elopement at 16, had already crumbled by the time she stepped into stardom. It was not a failure so much as a misguided attempt to claim independence from a life that often felt controlled by others. But as Jean's fame skyrocketed, so did expectations for her personal life. MGM believed their stars needed narratives, glamorous romances, elegant partnerships, stories that reinforced their public allure. And Jean, young and eager to prove she could navigate adulthood, found herself drifting into another marriage. Her second husband, Paul Byrne, was a prominent producer at MGM, intelligent, respected, and far more experienced than she. Many saw their union as beneficial, even strategic. Behind closed doors, though, the marriage struggled from the beginning. Differences in temperament, private tensions, and emotional incompatibilities created a fragile foundation. Jean tried to make it work, hoping stability might ease the pressure weighing on her career. But fate had other plans. When Paul Byrne died suddenly in 1932, Hollywood erupted. The studio sprinted into crisis mode, crafting explanations, hiding details, and spinning narratives to shield Jean from the scandal, threatening to swallow her. Tabloids swarmed, inventing stories questioning her, turning her grief into spectacle. Jean, devastated and bewildered, remained silent under MGM's instructions. She had lost a husband, however complicated their relationship had been, and she was given no time to mourn, only scripts to memorize and cameras to face. The ordeal left a mark on her. From that point forward, Jean carried an air of quiet sorrow beneath her vibrant persona, as if she had glimpsed the sharpest edge of Hollywood's machinery and could never fully forget it. She became more guarded, more aware of how vulnerable a star's private life truly was. Her third marriage to cinematographer Harold Rawson was brief, a flicker rather than a flame. They divorced amicably, more companions than lovers, both understanding that the union was a patch on wounds far deeper than either could heal. Amid all this turbulence, one person emerged as a steadying force: William Powell. Sophisticated, charming, and fiercely intelligent, Powell was both her co-star and confidant. Their connection settled into something profound, a blend of romance, companionship, and mutual respect. With him, Jean found a rare sanctuary. He treated her not as a product or a sensation, but as a woman with hopes, insecurities, and extraordinary warmth. Powell brought steadiness to her chaos, maturity to her youth, and quiet understanding to the noise surrounding her. Friends noted how she glowed differently around him, softer, more at ease, more Harleyan than Jean. Theirs was a relationship marked not by drama but by tenderness, a choice grounded in authenticity rather than publicity. Powell wanted to marry her, and Jean longed for a future with him, one free from studio's manipulation and relentless public scrutiny. Yet even within the comfort of love, Jean's life remained entangled in expectations and obligations she could not escape. Fame had given her brilliance, but had also carved out a loneliness only a few ever truly recognized. She lived in a world where everyone wanted a piece of her, yet few took the time to understand the girl beneath the glamour. And as her career soared higher, so did the emotional stakes for Powell, for her mother, and for Jean herself. Shadows were gathering at the edges of her bright world, approaching quietly, almost imperceptibly. The final act of her story was drawing near. As Hollywood pushed forward with relentless momentum, Jean Harlow found herself caught in a delicate balance between the demands of her career and the quiet needs of her own body and heart. Though she was adored, famous, and professionally unstoppable, her life had begun to feel like a race she had never asked to run, and one that was now accelerating beyond her ability to keep pace. By the mid-1930s, Jean had become one of MGM's most valuable stars, the kind of actress whose presence alone could lift a film to box office glory. Success followed her with remarkable consistency, yet the pressures behind each triumph grew heavier. Publicity tours, back-to-back productions, elaborate photo shoots, fan mail duties. Jean's life was a carousel of obligations that rarely allowed her to pause. She was admired for her energy, for her radiant humor, for her seemingly unbreakable glow. But inside, something was changing. Friends and colleagues noticed small shifts. Jean grew tired more easily. Her laughter, still sparkling, sometimes carried the faint echo of strain. She moved with the grace expected of a star, but also with a softness suggesting she needed rest she never truly received. When she began work on Saratoga in 1937, these subtle signs grew clearer. Those close to her sensed that she was pushing through each day with a quiet resolve, determined not to let anyone down, not the studio, not Powell, not the millions who adored her. On set, her professionalism never faltered. She delivered her lines with the same charm, audiences loved, joked with the crew, and maintained her reputation as one of the warmest, most gracious stars in the industry. But between takes, she often retreated into moments of stillness, gathering herself before stepping again into the light. MGM executives, aware of her value, kept a careful eye on her, urging her to take breaks, though the machine around her continued to move at full speed. Powell sensed the truth most acutely. He worried for her, offering comfort, urging her gently to rest. He envisioned a quiet future with her, a home away from noise from studio corridors, from pressures that asked for more than any one person could give. Jean longed for that future too. She dreamed of stepping out of character, shedding the obligations of superstardom, and living as Harleyan again, even if only for a little while. But life had its own plan. As filming progressed, Jean's strength faded. The sparkle remained, but it flickered more softly, like a candle fighting a persistent breeze. MGM, desperate to protect both their star and the production-adjusted schedules, revised scenes and ultimately called in stand-ins for shots that didn't require her face. The atmosphere on set shifted from excitement to concern, from routine to something much more fragile. Hollywood, a place built on illusion, had always seen Jean as indestructible, the glowing goddess who could brighten even the darkest theater. But in her last days, those illusions gently dissolved, revealing a young woman whose life had moved too fast, whose career had demanded too much, and whose heart had carried more than the world ever saw. When Jean's light finally dimmed at just 26 years old, the shock reverberated through the industry like an earthquake. Fans mourned the loss of their shimmering star. Fellow actors mourned the loss of a friend. Powell mourned the loss of the woman he had hoped to build a life with. MGM completed Saratoga through careful editing and doubles, but everyone understood the truth. No film could capture what had been lost. In her passing, Jean Harlow became something rare, a legend forever frozen in youth. She had not lived long, but she had lived brightly, fiercely, beautifully. Her story, brief as it was, carved itself into Hollywood's memory, a reminder of both the magic and the fragility of those who dare to shine. Her final act was not a fade-out. It was a moment of stillness and then eternal light. There are stars whose brilliance is measured in decades, and there are stars like Jean Harlow, rare, fleeting, and unforgettable. Her life was a brief flash across Hollywood's heavens, but the light she left behind has lasted far longer than the years she walked this earth. Even now, nearly a century later, her image remains suspended in time. The luminous hair, the mischievous smile, the delicate mixture of innocence and fire that made her unlike anyone who came before or after. Jean's story is more than a biography. It is a meditation on the power and cost of myth-making. Hollywood polished her until she gleamed, shaping her into the platinum blonde the world adored. But behind the crafted persona lived a young woman who loved deeply, worked tirelessly, laughed generously, and longed for a life gentler than the one she was given. She carried joy and sorrow with equal grace, never letting the weight of her private battles dull her public radiance. Her passing did not dim her legend, it defined it. In leaving the world so young, she became a symbol of eternal youth, forever frozen at the height of her beauty and charm. Her films, still shimmering on modern screens, feel like postcards from a golden dream. Her voice, her laughter, her glances into the camera remain untouched by time, as if she simply stepped out of the frame for a moment and may return at any second. Jean Harlow did not choose immortality, but it chose her. Her legacy is the glow she left behind, bright, soft, unending. And as long as Hollywood remembers its origins, as long as audiences still feel the pull of glamour and heartbreak, Jean's light will continue to shine. She lived briefly, she loved fiercely, and she remains, even now, eternal.